Flames flicker and roar across the ancient forges of Sumer, their searing glow casting long shadows over the earliest civilizations. In a world where fire meant survival, forge a weapon, bake bread, ward off the night, one deity stood at the heart of this primal power, Gibil, the god of fire and metallurgy. But he wasn't just a bringer of warmth or destruction. In the hands of the Sumerians, fire became something sacred, a bridge between the earthly and the divine, and Gibil. He was the master of that alchemy. Imagine living in a time when metal was more than just a tool. It was magic pulled from the earth itself, shaped by flames whispered to life by the gods. That's the world we're stepping into today. The myths of Gibil aren't just forgotten tales. They're echoes of humanity's first great leap forward. Before science explained combustion, before factories churned out steel, there was a god who embodied the mystery and might of fire's transformative power. Temples rose in his honor, artisans prayed for his favor, and kings sought his blessing to turn raw ore into weapons that could build empires. But who was Gibil really? Was he a benevolent teacher guiding mortals to harness fire's secrets, or a capricious force as unpredictable as a wildfire? The answers lie buried in clay tablets and the remnants of smithies older than recorded history. This isn't just a story about flames and metal, it's about how a civilization saw the divine in the spark of innovation. From the ritual fires of temple altars to the furnaces that birthed the first bronze, Gibil's influence was everywhere. And today we're piecing together his legacy, the prayers uttered over molten metal, the myths that painted him as both creator and destroyer, and the startling ways his worship shaped Sumerian culture. So let's stoke the embers of the past and uncover the secrets of the god who lit the way for humanity's greatest inventions. Because when you look into the heart of a forge, you're not just seeing fire, you're glimpsing the face of a god. To understand Gibil's place in the Sumerian cosmos, we have to trace his origins back to the very foundations of their mythology. Unlike gods tied to a single domain, Gibil embodied duality. Fire could forge and fire could ravage, and so did he. Some ancient texts name him the son of Anu, the sky god and king of the pantheon, while others link him to Enlil, the storm deity whose winds fanned the flames. This divine lineage wasn't just a family tree, it was a statement of power. Being born of the heavens or the tempest meant Gibil's flames weren't mere earthly phenomena, they carried the authority of the gods themselves. Picture the Sumerian pantheon as a sprawling, celestial court, where each deity had a role as precise as the gears in a clock. Gibil's niche, the alchemist of the divine. While gods like Utu brought light and Nanna governed the moon, Gibil's realm was transformation. Fire didn't just burn, it purified metal, hardened pottery, and turned grain into bread. Yet in the same breath, it could reduce cities to ash. This paradox made him indispensable. When a blacksmith prayed over a furnace, they weren't just asking for heat, they were begging a god to reshape the very fabric of matter. But Gibil's duality goes deeper than his domain. In hymns, he's praised as both the raging flame and the gentle glow, a deity who could nurture or annihilate on a whim. One tablet describes him forging the first plow, a gift to humanity that unlocked agriculture. Another recounts how his fury incinerated rebels who defied the gods. This wasn't inconsistency, it was theology in action. The Sumerians saw fire's caprice as divine will, and Gibil's unpredictability mirrored life itself. Prosperity and disaster weren't opposites, they were two sides of the same sacred flame. His worship wasn't confined to smoky temples. Archaeologists have found tiny clay figurines of Gibil buried in the walls of smithies, talismans against misfortune. Kings invoked his name before launching military campaigns, not just for victory but for the strength of their bronze swords. Even cooks offered scraps to his hearths, a reminder that every flickering fire from the grandest forge to the humblest kitchen was his domain. To the Sumerians, Gibil wasn't just a god. He was the spark of civilization itself, the unseen hand guiding humanity's greatest leaps, and that's why his legacy burns bright even after millennia. Fire wasn't just a tool to the Sumerians, it was a sacred force, and Gibil stood at the center of its mystery. His mastery over flames went far beyond warmth or light. It was about transformation. In a world where raw metal pulled from the earth could be reshaped into blades, plows, or even divine statues, fire was the invisible hand guiding humanity's greatest leaps. And Gibil, he was the divine smith, the one who taught mortals to harness this power. But his influence wasn't limited to the forge. Fire played a role in rituals, purifying offerings to the gods, and even in healing, where it was believed to cleanse both body and spirit. The Sumerians saw fire as a bridge between the earthly and the divine, the ordinary and the extraordinary. Bronze, the alloy that revolutionized warfare and agriculture, was Gibil's greatest gift to humanity. Before iron dominated battlefields, bronze was the metal that built empires, and its creation was nothing short of alchemy. Mixing copper and tin required precise heat too little, and the metals wouldn't bond too much and the mixture would fail. This delicate balance wasn't just technical, it was sacred. Blacksmiths didn't work alone, they worked under Gibil's watchful gaze, whispering prayers as they stoked their furnaces. A well-made bronze sword wasn't just a weapon, it was a covenant between man and God, a tangible piece of divine craftsmanship. But Gibil's flames weren't only for war. The same metallurgical breakthroughs that forged swords also birthed tools that changed daily life. Bronze plows turned hard soil into fertile fields, sickles made harvests more efficient, and axes cleared land for new cities. Every advancement carried his mark. Even beyond metal, fire shaped Sumerian culture in unexpected ways. Kilns baked the bricks that built ziggurats, and furnaces fired the pottery that stored grain. Without Gibil's influence, the foundations of civilization would have crumbled. Yet fire's duality was always present. The same blaze that strengthened metal could reduce a city to charred ruins. The Sumerians understood this balance, worshipping Gibil not just as a benefactor but as a force to be appeased. Rituals honored him before lighting any forge, and offerings were made to ward off his wrath. A smith's workshop wasn't just a workplace, it was a temple in miniature, where every strike of the hammer echoed with reverence. To work with fire was to dance with a god, and the Sumerians never forgot who led the steps. The legacy of Gibil's domain still burns today. Every modern forge, every flickering candle carries a whisper of that ancient reverence. The next time you watch a flame dance, remember, you're seeing the same power that once shaped empires, guarded by a god who turned raw earth into civilization. If you were to walk into a Sumerian temple dedicated to Gibil, the first thing you'd notice wouldn't be an imposing statue. It would be the symbols whispering of his presence everywhere. Flaming torches carved into door frames, serpentine patterns coiled around altar bases, the silhouette of a hammer and tongs etched into clay tablets. These weren't just decorations, they were a sacred language, a visual code revealing the god's power and personality. Take the torch, for example. More than a source of light, it symbolized Gibil's role as an illuminator, both literally and spiritually. Fire didn't just pierce darkness, it revealed hidden truths, purified the unclean, and transformed the ordinary into the divine. When priests carried torches in rituals, they weren't just holding flames, they were channeling Gibil's essence, enacting his power to make the unseen visible. Then there were the tools of the forge, recurring motifs in temple reliefs and amulets. Hammers, anvils, and tongs weren't merely practical items, they were sacred extensions of Gibil's hands. A blacksmith's hammer striking molten metal echoed the god's own shaping of the world, order from chaos, strength from raw ore. These symbols weren't passive. They served as reminders that every act of creation, from forging a sword to molding a clay cup, was a collaboration with the divine. Even the way these tools were depicted held meaning. In some carvings, Gibil's hammer glows as if heated from within, a nod to the belief that his craftsmanship was supernatural, infusing mortal work with otherworldly precision. But perhaps the most intriguing symbol tied to Gibil is the serpent. Unlike later cultures that feared serpents as evil, the Sumerians saw them as embodiments of transformation creatures that shed their skin, mirroring fire's ability to destroy and renew. Serpents coiled around Gibil's statues or carved into temple walls represented the cyclical nature of his power. Just as flames reduce wood to ash but leave fertile soil behind, the serpent symbolized rebirth from destruction. Some scholars argue the serpent also evoked the shimmering heat of a forge, the way molten metal twists like a living thing under the smith's hand. These symbols didn't exist in isolation. They intertwined in rituals and artistry, telling a story deeper than words. A votive plaque might show Gibil holding a torch aloft while standing on an anvil, serpents writhing at his feet, a single image capturing his roles as light bringer, craftsman, and agent of change. Even the colors used held significance. Red ochre painted flames in murals wasn't just artistic choice. It invoked the blood of the earth, the life force Gibil channeled through fire. Every detail, from the curve of a serpent's tail to the angle of a hammer's strike, was a deliberate prayer in visual form. What's striking is how these symbols transcended class. A wealthy merchant might commission a finely carved seal with Gibil's torch, while a potter pressed a crude serpent charm into clay before firing it. This wasn't just worship, it was a shared vocabulary of reverence, uniting everyone from kings to laborers under the god's watchful gaze. Even today, millennia later, these symbols still speak if you know how to listen. The next time you see a coiled serpent or the glow of a blacksmith's forge, remember, you're glimpsing fragments of a language older than history, one that still whispers of a god who shaped the world with flame. In the grand tapestry of Sumerian creation myths, Gibil's flames didn't just burn, they shaped reality itself. One pivotal story tells how he aided Enki, the god of wisdom and fresh waters, in subduing the primordial chaos of the underworld. When the Abzu, the dark watery abyss, threatened to overflow and drown the world, it wasn't just water against water, it was chaos against order. Enki needed a weapon no liquid could quench. That's where Gibil stepped in, forging a blazing spear from celestial copper, its tip tempered in divine fire. As Enki drove the weapon into the turbulent depths, Gibil's flames didn't merely repel the waters, they transformed them. The searing heat crystallized chaos into boundaries, creating the first stable layers of the underworld. This wasn't just divine metallurgy, it was cosmic architecture, where fire became the chisel carving order from formlessness. Another myth paints Gibil as the unseen force behind the heaven's very structure. When Anu sought to fix the stars in place, ordinary tools couldn't bind light to the sky. So Gibil devised an ingenious solution. He crafted anchors from meteoric iron, then superheated them until they glowed white-hot. As the gods hammered these fiery rivets into the firmament, the metal cooled into unbreakable bonds, its molecular structure altered by Gibil's sacred flames. The stars, once scattered like embers in the wind, now held their positions for eternity. Here, fire wasn't destructive, it was the glue of the cosmos, welding celestial bodies into their eternal dance. Perhaps most strikingly, Gibil appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh not as a background player but as a pivotal architect of destiny. When the gods decide to create Enkidu as Gilgamesh's equal, they don't merely sculpt clay. They consult Gibil to temper the newborn spirit. The fire god breathes into the clay figure not life but purpose, his flames hardening Enkidu's resolve like bronze in a mold. This subtle detail reveals a profound theological insight. To the Sumerians, character wasn't born, it was forged, hammered into shape by divine fire. Even humanity's greatest hero needed Gibil's touch to reach his potential. These myths share a common thread, fire as the great equalizer between gods and elements. Where water could erode and wind could scatter, fire alone possessed the power to fundamentally alter matter's nature. Gibil's role wasn't merely functional, it was existential. Without his flames, chaos would have remained unchecked, stars would have refused their paths, and heroes would have lacked their mettle. The Sumerians understood something modern science would later confirm. That fire, whether in a star's core or a forger's heart, is the engine of transformation. And Gibil, he was the divine blacksmith stoking that engine. His hammer strikes echoing through every layer of creation. Yet his creative power carried an edge of danger. In one lesser-known tablet, Gibil accidentally overfires a celestial weapon meant for Nergal, god of war. The resulting blaze scorches the edges of the world, creating the first deserts, a reminder that even divine fire could spiral beyond control. This duality made Gibil's worship so vital. The same flames that crafted the universe could unmake it, and only through ritual and respect could mortals hope to channel such power safely. The Sumerians didn't see creation myths as simple stories. They were blueprints for living in a world where fire's gifts came with solemn responsibility. Gibil's presence in these tales wasn't just about explaining natural phenomena. It was about teaching humanity its place in the delicate balance of a fire-forged cosmos. Fire didn't just shape the world of the living for the Sumerians. It was a bridge to the realm of the dead. In the shadowy depths of the underworld known as Ker, Gibil's flames took on an even more profound role. Here, fire wasn't merely a tool or a weapon. It became a gatekeeper, a purifier, and a force of reckoning. When Inanna, the goddess of love and war, descended into the underworld in the famed myth The Descent of Inanna, she didn't just face darkness, she confronted Gibil's transformative power in its most raw and terrifying form. At each of the 7 gates leading to Ker, she was stripped of her divine adornments, her power dismantled layer by layer, and what awaited her at the lowest level. Not just death, but the refining fire of judgment. Some interpretations suggest Gibil's presence here was no accident. His flames didn't just destroy, they revealed truth, burning away illusions until only the unvarnished essence of a soul remained. The underworld wasn't a place of eternal punishment for the Sumerians, but it wasn't a paradise either. It was a barren, dusty expanse where souls lingered in shadow unless they carried Gibil's favor. Texts describe how the god's fire could scorch the unworthy but also illuminate the path for righteous souls, guiding them to a rare place of rest. In one ritual tablet, a priest invokes Gibil as the torch in the land of no return, a beacon in the oppressive gloom of Ker. This duality, fire as both destroyer and guide, mirrored his role in the mortal world. Just as a forger's heat could ruin flawed metal or perfect a masterpiece, Gibil's underworld flames could reduce a soul to ash or temper it into something enduring. What's especially fascinating is how Gibil's underworld connections intersected with metallurgy. The Sumerians believed the dead were buried with grave goods not just for sentiment, but because the underworld's rulers required tribute, often in the form of metal objects. Copper amulets, bronze weapons, even simple iron rings were thought to gain new significance in Ker, where Gibil's influence still held sway. Some scholars argue this practice reflects a deeper belief that metal forged in fire carried a spark of the divine into the afterlife. A sword buried with a warrior wasn't just a tool, it was a covenant with Gibil, a plea for his protection beyond the veil. But Gibil's role in the underworld wasn't purely symbolic. In fragments of a lost hymn, he's described standing beside Ereshkigal, queen of the dead, as she passed judgment. His flames didn't burn indiscriminately, they responded to the weight of a soul's deeds. A righteous soul might feel only warmth, while a deceitful one would writhe in agonizing heat. This idea that fire could measure morality wasn't unique to Sumer. It echoes in later traditions, from Zoroastrian fire temples to Christian visions of purgatory. Yet Gibil's presence in these early texts suggests the Sumerians saw fire's judgment as deeply personal, a reflection of individual choices rather than blanket damnation. Perhaps most striking is how Gibil's underworld fire tied into cycles of renewal. Some burial texts reference the flames of return, a cryptic phrase that hints at rebirth. While the Sumerians didn't embrace reincarnation as later cultures would, they did believe in transformation, ashes nourishing the earth, metal being reforged into new shapes. Gibil's fire in Kher might not promise resurrection, but it did offer change. Even in death, nothing was truly static. A soul could be refined, much like ore in a furnace, its impurities burned away until only its essential nature remained. This belief bled into funeral rites themselves. Excavations of royal tombs revealed traces of intentional fires set around burial chambers, not cremations but ritual burnings. Archaeologists debate whether these were purification acts or symbolic offerings to Gibil, ensuring the deceased had his favor before entering Kher. Either way, the message is clear. From life's first forge to the final embers of the grave, Gibil's flames were inseparable from the human journey. His presence in the underworld wasn't an afterthought. It was proof that to the Sumerians, fire didn't end things, it transformed them. And in that transformation, even death held a glimmer of his sacred, unquenchable light. Among the bustling cities of ancient Sumer, Kutha stood apart as the beating heart of Gibil's worship. This sacred city, nestled along the banks of the Euphrates, wasn't just a religious hub, it was a living testament to fire's divine power. At its center rose the Decode Gibil, the House of Gibil, a temple complex where smoke curled skyward day and night. Unlike other temples adorned with gold or lapis lazuli, Gibil's sanctuary thrived on raw, elemental simplicity. Its walls were lined with fire-blackened bricks, and the air carried the tang of molten metal. Pilgrims didn't come merely to pray. They came to witness the god's presence in flickering altar flames and the rhythmic clang of sacred forges. Inside the temple, rituals unfolded with precision. Each dawn, priests clad in copper-plated robes stoked the eternal flame, a fire said to have been kindled by Gibil himself. Offerings weren't the typical grain or wine, but bundles of rare woods, blocks of aromatic cedar, and ingots of unworked bronze. When these materials met the flames, their transformation was more than symbolic, it was communion. As cedar resin crackled and metal softened, priests chanted hymns praising Gibil as the furnace that refines kings and the spark in the artisan's hand. Industrial workshops flanked the temple, their activities as much a part of worship as prayer. Blacksmiths shaping ritual tools paused to anoint their hammers with oil, while potters whispered invocations before loading kilns. Here, labor and liturgy were inseparable, a reminder that every flame, no matter how humble, carried divine potential. But Kutha wasn't the only stage for Gibil's veneration. In the famed ziggurat housed a shrine where merchants weighed lumps of incense against silver before burning them, a trade literally fueling devotion. At Nippur, annual festivals reenacted Gibil's forging of the first plow, with priests dragging a bronze blade through symbolic furrows while crowds cheered. Yet the most dramatic rites occurred during crises. When plague struck or enemy armies gathered, entire cities participated in the burning of the fault, a ritual where every household extinguished their hearths. The high priest alone would reignite them from Kutha's eternal flame, an act believed to purify the community through Gibil's renewing fire. The tools of worship were as pragmatic as they were profound. Excavations have revealed tiny clay kilns placed in temple courtyards, likely used to bake prayers into physical form. A supplicant might press a pinch of metal dust into a tablet inscribed with pleas for a healthy child or a prosperous harvest, then fire it in the sacred kiln. The resulting object, now hardened by Gibil's element, became a permanent conduit between mortal and divine. Even warfare carried his imprint. Before campaigns, generals presented swords to priests for awakening, a ritual where blades were heated just shy of melting to infuse them with the god's fury. What's striking is how these practices blurred the line between sacred and mundane. A baker kneading dough near a temple oven was participating in Gibil's worship as surely as a priest tending the eternal flame. This wasn't a distant deity demanding abstract praise. This was a god who lived in the sweat of a smith's brow and the glow of a cook's coals. To work with fire in any capacity was to collaborate with the divine. And that's why Gibil's temples thrived not as isolated sanctuaries but as vibrant workshops where heaven and earth met at the anvil's edge. The legacy of these rituals lingers in unexpected ways. Modern metallurgists still speak of metal, remembering its treatment under heat, an echo of the Sumerian belief that Gibil's touch permanently altered matter. Next time you strike a match or watch a welder's torch, remember, you're glimpsing a thread of devotion stretching back to Cutha's smoke-filled halls where every spark was a prayer made visible. Every spring, as the barley fields turned golden and the Euphrates swelled with meltwater, Sumerian cities erupted in celebration for Gibil's most sacred festival, the Zababaku, or Day of Burning Purity. This wasn't just another religious event, it was a symphony of fire, metal, and earth where the gods' power touched every aspect of life. For 3 days, the line between sacred and secular blurred. Farmers carried torches woven from dried river reeds through their fields, the flames symbolizing Gibil's promise to purge blight and bless the coming harvest. Blacksmiths competed in public demonstrations, their forges fueled by olive wood blessed in temple rites. Even children participated, molding tiny copper amulets to be ritually melted and reshaped, a lesson in transformation as much as craftsmanship. A climax came at dusk on the final day when a procession of priests carried the juru, a ceremonial bronze brazier, from Cutha's temple to the royal palace. Crowds parted as the brazier passed, its coals said to contain embers from Gibil's own forge. Upon arrival, the king, acting as both ruler and high priest, would add a fragment of meteoric iron to the flames. As the metal hissed and glowed, court scribes recorded the patterns in the smoke, interpreting them as divine forecasts for the year ahead. This moment fused politics with piety, reinforcing that the monarchy's legitimacy depended on Gibil's favor. A clear, rising smoke column might herald military victories, while erratic sparks could prompt emergency rituals to avert famine. But the festival's most visceral ritual was the akil, or trial by sacred flame. Volunteers, often soldiers or aspiring priests, walked barefoot across a bed of heated ceramic tiles, their path sprinkled with barley flour that blackened instantly underfoot. Surviving the walk unscathed wasn't just a test of endurance, it was believed to prove Gibil's direct protection. Those who succeeded earned the title fire-touched and were exempted from taxes for a year, a shrewd blend of spiritual incentive and social engineering. Failures, though rare, weren't seen as punishments but as omens requiring communal atonement. Metalworking guilds turned the festival into a showcase of innovation. In Lagash, excavations have revealed temporary innovation stalls where smiths displayed breakthroughs like tin-alloyed bronze or curved sickle blades. These weren't mere trade fairs. Each new tool was consecrated with a drop of molten copper poured over a clay tablet inscribed with Gibil's name. The fusion of technology and ritual reflected a core belief: progress itself was a form of worship. Even failures held meaning. Cracks in cooling metal were studied like oracle bones, with priests debating whether they revealed flaws in technique or divine warnings about overambition. Agricultural rites wove through every aspect of the celebrations. Before dawn on the second day, farmers circled their fields with torches made from last year's harvest waste, chanting hymns that tied Gibil's flames to the sun's life-giving heat. At noon, communal ovens baked barley loaves mixed with ashes from temple fires. Eating them was thought to transfer the god's strength to both body and soil. This wasn't superstition, it was sophisticated symbology. By linking metallurgy and agriculture, the Sumerians acknowledged that fire didn't just shape tools, it sustained civilization itself. A thriving field and a well-forged plow were two sides of the same sacred coin. royal involvement reached its peak during the Bergula or crown fire. The king's ceremonial regalia, crown, scepter, and seal were placed in a specialized kiln and heated until they glowed red-hot. Removing them unharmed required precise temperature control, a metaphor for the delicate balance of rule. Success proved the monarch's divine right. Failure could trigger political upheaval. Remarkably, cuneiform records from describe one king who secretly substituted his crown with a replica for the ritual, only to be deposed weeks later when the deception was discovered. To the Sumerians, this wasn't just treason, it was blasphemy, a disruption of the cosmic order Gibil's fire maintained. As the festivals faded into memory each year, their legacy lingered. The newly blessed tools increased crop yields, the royal prophecies guided policy, and the communal bonding strengthened social cohesion. But perhaps the most enduring impact was psychological. In a world where fire remained mysteriously powerful, capable of both creation and catastrophe, these rituals gave people a sense of control. By honoring Gibil collectively, they weren't just appeasing a god, they were mastering his element through shared tradition. The ashes swept from festival grounds were carefully collected, later mixed into clay for royal building projects, ensuring Gibil's presence literally shaped the cities themselves. Modern echoes of these celebrations persist in unexpected places. The Zoroastrian practice of jumping over fire during Nowruz or the Christian Pentecost's flame symbolism may trace roots to these ancient rites. Even today's metalworking guilds retain traces of ritual, like the Japanese swordsmiths who still don white robes before forging sacred blades. The Sumerians understood something we often forget: that fire's magic lies not just in its heat, but in its ability to transform not just metal but communities. When we gather around bonfires or light candles in ceremony, we're participating in a tradition that once united cities under the watchful gaze of a fire god. The genius of these festivals lay in their layered meanings. A torch procession wasn't just spectacle, it mapped the celestial path of Gibil's divine forge. A blacksmith's demonstration wasn't mere entertainment, it reenacted the creation of the world from primordial chaos, and every spark that leaped from an anvil carried a whisper of the sacred, proof that for the Sumerians, the boundary between work and worship was as thin as the edge of a well-tempered blade. For Sumerian craftsmen, lighting a forge wasn't just a practical act, it was a sacred conversation with Gibil. Blacksmiths began each workday by tracing his symbol, a stylized flame, into the ashes of their furnaces before striking the first spark. The tools themselves became extensions of the divine. Anvils were often inscribed with prayers like "Gibil's hand guides this hammer," and bellows bore tiny serpents, symbols of the god's transformative power. When a blade cracked during tempering or bronze bubbled too violently, it wasn't seen as a technical failure but as a sign the god had withdrawn his favor. Artisans would halt production, offering lumps of precious tin or carved cedar into the flames to restore harmony. Even the rhythm of their labor carried ritual significance. The 3 steady strikes of a hammer against hot metal mirrored the cadence of temple chants, turning mundane work into worship. Potters relied on Gibil's mercy just as deeply. Before loading a kiln, they'd press tiny clay tablets inscribed with pleas like "May your breath steady this fire" between the vessels. The risks were real. A kiln firing too fast could shatter weeks of labor in minutes. Surviving workshop records from describe how master potters paid flame watchers, apprentices trained to read the color and movement of fires for divine messages. A blue-tinged flame licking the kiln's upper chamber might prompt an offering of juniper berries, while erratic sparks could mean postponing the firing entirely. When pots emerged unscathed, they weren't just products, they were physical proof of Gibil's blessing, often stamped with his emblem before sale. But the god's influence reached far beyond workshops. In humble households, fire rituals wove through daily life like invisible threads. Newborns were passed over a candle's flame to seal them against illness, a practice echoing Gibil's role as both protector and purifier. Brides carried torches lit from communal hearths to their new homes, symbolizing the transfer of the god's favor between families. Even mealtime became an act of devotion. Bread baked over oak fires was believed to carry Gibil's strength, while meat roasted without proper prayers risked attracting malevolent spirits. The most poignant domestic rituals involved threshold fires. At each new moon, families would sweep their doorways clean, then ignite a small bundle of aromatic woods, cedar, myrtle, and tamarisk, just over the entrance. As smoke curled upward, they'd whisper petitions for health or prosperity. Archaeologists have found these charred remnants perfectly preserved in doorframes at sites like Nippur, their layered ashes revealing generations repeating the same ritual. What's striking is how these private acts mirrored grand temple ceremonies. Whether in a royal forge or a peasant's oven, fire was never just fire, it was a living connection to the divine. Healers also summoned Gibil's power in unexpected ways. Medical texts prescribe fire cupping, where heated bronze vessels drew out illness, accompanied by incantations naming the god as the burner of fevers. Broken bones were set near smoldering malt cakes, their warmth believed to fuse fractures as metal joins in a forge. Even mental distress fell under Gibil's domain. Patients, described as shadow-touched, were seated between two controlled blazes to melt oppressive spirits away. The depth of this integration becomes clear in legal disputes. Trial records show smiths swearing oaths not on a holy book but on their anvils, invoking Gibil to strike them down if they lied. Marriage contracts from Lhasa include clauses requiring husbands to maintain a pure hearth flame as proof of domestic stability. A merchant's ledger might note a sail alongside a charcoal doodle of Gibil's torch, less decoration than a spiritual receipt ensuring honest trade. Perhaps most telling are the personal names preserved in clay tablets. Gibil Ili, Gibil is my god, Gibil Natan, Gibil has given, even playful nicknames like Gibil Tapi, Gibil's little flame. These weren't just labels, they were constant invocations, weaving the god into the very identity of his worshippers. From the grandest temple to the simplest cookfire, Gibil's presence was as essential as oxygen to the flame, invisible yet vital, ordinary yet miraculous. The Sumerians didn't just use fire, they lived in perpetual dialogue with it, guided by a deity who turned every spark into a potential sacrament. Among the cracked clay tablets of ancient Mesopotamia, some of the most revealing texts aren't epic poems or royal decrees, they're whispered pleas for protection, etched in cuneiform. Here, in the realm of magic and incantation, Gibil's name burns brightest as both sword and shield against the unseen dangers of the world. Take the famous Sherpu series, where fire isn't just a metaphor for purification, it's the physical medium of salvation. A healer treating fever might inscribe the sufferer's name on a clay figurine, then recite, "By Gibil's sacred flame, may this wax melt as the illness departs," before tossing it into a brazier. The logic was beautifully literal. As the fire consumed the effigy, so too would it devour the affliction. But Gibil's role in these spells wasn't just about destruction, it was about transformation. In the Maklu anti-witchcraft rituals, practitioners would burn specific herbs while invoking him as the cleanser who sparks blind evil. The choice of materials mattered intensely. Myrtle wood, which crackled with fragrant blue flames, was thought to carry Gibil's purifying breath, while acacia, a wood that burned exceptionally hot, was reserved for curses needing annihilating force. Archaeologists have found these ritual braziers buried in home foundations, their interiors layered with charred remnants of juniper and dates, proof that ordinary families called on the fire god as routinely as we might take aspirin. Some of the most striking spells revealed Gibil's unexpected gentleness. A childbirth incantation from Sippar instructs midwives to circle the birthing room with a copper torch, a metal sacred to the god, chanting, "As Gibil softens hard metal, may he soften the way for this child." The imagery here is profoundly tactile, likening the miracle of birth to the alchemy of a smith's furnace. Even today, traces of these rituals linger. The modern Yazidi people of Iraq still pass newborns through smoke for protection, an echo of Gibil's ancient blessings. Demons feared Gibil's flames above all. Texts describe the fire god's ability to scorch the Utuku, malevolent spirits that brought nightmares and paralysis. One particularly vivid tablet from Nineveh details an exorcism where the priest builds 7 small fires in a crescent pattern, each fueled with sulfur, a mineral that burns with otherworldly blue flames. As the sulfur hissed, the incantation proclaimed, "Gibil's teeth gnash in this blaze, flee, demon, lest your shadow burn." The choice of sulfur wasn't arbitrary. Its stench and eerie glow made it the perfect physical representation of divine wrath. Yet for all their terror, these fire rituals often carried profound tenderness. A heartbreaking love spell from Mari involves shaping 2 clay figures, one for the lover, one for the beloved, then placing them in a bed of embers with the prayer, "As Gibil joins ore into bronze, let these hearts be inseparable." The fire here isn't destructive but unifying, reflecting the god's role as cosmic matchmaker. Modern metallurgists might smile at the metaphor after all. Creating bronze does literally fuse copper and tin at the molecular level. But to the Sumerians, this was divine magic written into the fabric of matter. The tools of these rituals were as precise as any surgeon's instruments. Excavations at a shore uncovered a witch doctor's kit containing a silver stylus for inscribing wax, a miniature bronze brazier, and packets of powdered iron oxide, the same pigment used to depict Gibil's flames in temple art. Every item served multiple purposes. The brazier both symbolized the god and provided real heat for spells, while the iron oxide could be mixed into ink for protective amulets or sprinkled into fires for enhanced vividness. This blending of practical and sacred typified Mesopotamian magic, where every action vibrated on both physical and spiritual frequencies. What emerges from these tablets is a portrait of Gibil far more nuanced than a simplistic fire deity. He wasn't merely invoked to burn away evil, but to carefully reshape reality, whether that meant hardening a sword edge, easing a fever, or knitting souls together. The same flames that could reduce a city to ashes also sterilized wounds in medical texts, where heated bronze scalpels were praised as Gibil's claws that heal as they cut. This duality lies at the heart of his enduring appeal. Fire terrifying yet indispensable, destructive yet creative, and always a force that separates the temporary from the eternal with relentless clarity. Perhaps no text captures this balance better than the rarely discussed hymn to Gibil the Judge, where the god sits not on a throne but an anvil, weighing souls not against feathers but against ingots of pure copper. The untrue life bubbles like flawed bronze, the hymn warns, but the righteous soul rings clear when struck. In that single image, theology, metallurgy, and ethics fuse, proof that for the Sumerians, morality wasn't abstract. It was as tangible as a well-made blade, tested on the forge of existence under the unforgiving gaze of the fire god. Gibil didn't blaze through Sumerian mythology alone. His fiery legacy was intertwined with a pantheon of deities, each relationship sparking new layers of meaning. Take Nusku, the god of light and sacred fire. At first glance, they might seem like rivals, both wielding flames, but their dynamic was more like complementary forces. Nusku's fire was the steady glow of temple lamps and celestial radiance, while Gibil's burned in the soot-streaked forges and volcanic depths. Together, they represented fire's dual nature, one illuminating, the other transforming. Texts from Nippur describe them as brothers in some traditions, with Nusku as the elder who taught Gibil to gentle the wild flame. Yet in other tablets, their bond feels more transactional. Nusku's light exposed the ore, and Gibil's furnace refined it. This wasn't just divine division of labor, it was theology mirroring human innovation, where discovery and craftsmanship relied on each other. Then there's Ishtar, the tempestuous goddess of love and war. Their connection was anything but tranquil. In the epic era and Isham, Gibil tempers weapons for Ishtar's armies, but their alliance cracks under her caprice. When she demands a sword hot enough to melt the horizon, Gibil refuses, knowing such unchecked heat would ravage the land. The resulting clash isn't just a divine squabble, it's a metaphor for the tension between creation and destruction. Ishtar's wars needed fire-forged steel, but Gibil's role as a stabilizer forced her to reckon with consequences. Later hymns soften their rivalry, portraying Ishtar anointing Gibil's brow with lapis dust to cool his fury, a nod to how even gods must balance their natures. But no relationship defined Gibil's role more profoundly than his bond with Enki, the god of wisdom and freshwater. Here, fire and water didn't oppose, they collaborated. When Enki sought to create the first humans, it was Gibil's furnace that baked the clay of their forms, infusing them with resilience. In one striking myth from Eridu, Enki sends Gibil on a quest to the underworld to retrieve the fire that knows no fuel, a primordial spark hidden in the abyss. Their partnership reveals a startling truth. The Sumerians saw fire and water not as enemies but as partners in alchemy. Enki's rivers carried the minerals Gibil's flames would later shape, and together they crafted the tools of civilization. A broken prism from depicts them back to back, Enki holding an overflowing vase while Gibil lifts a blazing ingot, yin and yang in Mesopotamian form. Lesser-known ties also shaped Gibil's myths. With Nergal, god of plague, and the underworld, he shared a grim kinship. Both wielded destructive power, but where Nergal's fires brought indiscriminate death, Gibil's were precise. Funeral texts describe them as uneasy allies, Nergal providing the coals for cremation pyres while Gibil ensured the flames purified rather than consumed. Even Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld, sought his expertise. Her famed fires of judgment were said to burn with Gibil's borrowed heat, tempered to test souls without obliterating them. Perhaps most touching is Gibil's bond with the artisan gods. The goddess Ninmug, patron of metalworkers, appears in cylinder seals standing beside him at the anvil, her hands guiding his hammer. Their synergy birthed a tradition where every craftsman was considered a child of both deities, Ninmug granting skill, Gibil providing the transformative spark. Meanwhile, the agricultural goddess Nisaba owed him a debt too. Hymns credit Gibil's fires for hardening the first bronze sickles that made large-scale harvests possible. These relationships weren't just divine drama. They were mirrors of human experience. The tension between Gibil and Ishtar reflected real debates over war's cost. His partnership with Enki paralleled the practical collaboration between Sumerian ironsmiths and irrigation engineers. Even the contrast with Nusku echoed the distinction between a scholar's lamp and a blacksmith's forge. By weaving Gibil into the pantheon's web, the Sumerians acknowledged a profound truth. Fire never exists in isolation. It's a force that binds, transforms, and occasionally scorches, just like the gods who wielded it. While fire deities appear across countless mythologies, Gibil's role in Sumerian belief stands apart in fascinating ways. Take Gara, the Akkadian fire god who absorbed many of Gibil's traits during Mesopotamia's cultural blending. At first glance, they seem identical, both wielded flames and received offerings of aromatic woods, but dig deeper and key differences emerge. Gara became primarily a guardian of justice, his fires purifying oath-takers in legal ceremonies. Gibil, meanwhile, never lost his artisan soul. Even when worshipped alongside Gara in later periods, Sumerian hymns still called him the hands that shape the bones of the earth, emphasizing his creative metallurgy over judicial roles. This distinction matters. It shows how Sumerians uniquely linked fire not to abstract ideals but to tangible innovation. Then there's Agni, the Hindu fire god whose worship continues today. Both deities serve as messengers between gods and mortals, their rising smoke carrying prayers skyward. Yet Agni's flames lean heavily toward ritual purity, blessing weddings, consecrating spaces, cleansing sins. Gibil's fire, by contrast, was as much workshop as altar. A Vedic priest might kindle Agni to burn symbolic offerings, but a Sumerian smith prayed to Gibil while literally melting ore. This practical orientation reveals a cultural fingerprint. Where Agni's fire transcends the material world, Gibil's reshapes it. Even their mythic origins differ. Agni springs from divine will alone, while Gibil inherits his power from sky and storm deities, grounding him in the natural world. The Egyptian goddess Sekhmet offers another striking contrast. Like Gibil, she embodies fire's destructive potential, her breath said to scorch enemies. But Sekhmet's flames are solely weapons, uncontrolled and devastating. Gibil's fire, even at its most fearsome, always serves a purpose, whether forging tools or purging impurity. That measured duality appears uniquely Sumerian. Even the Greek Hephaestus, though a divine smith, lacks Gibil's cosmic scope. While Hephaestus crafts weapons for heroes, Gibil's duties stretch beyond the anvil. His flames structure the underworld, anchor stars, and temper the human soul itself. Perhaps most telling is who's missing from Gibil's stories. Unlike the Aztec Xicotencatli or Slavic Svarog, he's never depicted as a sun deity. To the Sumerians, fire's magic lay not in celestial grandeur but in earthly transformation, the alchemy of turning stone to metal, clay to pottery, grain to bread. This focus roots him in the grit of human progress rather than distant cosmic cycles. Even his metallurgical specialty reflects Sumer's historical reality as the birthplace of bronze, where smiths held near sacred status. Other fire gods illuminate or destroy. Gibil fundamentally alters, making him less a force of nature than a partner in civilization's rise. These comparisons reveal a profound truth: how cultures envision fire reflects what they value most. For the Sumerians, it wasn't fear of destruction or even awe at light, but reverence for the moment raw materials became something greater. That's why Gibil endures not just as a god, but as a testament to humanity's first great leap, the discovery that with fire and skill we could reshape the world itself. Not all of Gibil's flames brought progress, some carried pure annihilation. One of the most chilling tales etched into cuneiform tablets tells of the destruction of Aratta, a once great city that dared to mock the gods. According to fragments from the Epic of Enmerkar, Aratta's king boasted his jeweled walls could withstand divine wrath. Gibil's response was merciless. He didn't merely burn the city, he transformed its very stones. The myth describes how his flames grew so intense, the palace's gold veins melted and ran through the streets like rivers, while lapis lazuli ornaments fused into glass beneath the heat. Survivors claimed the air itself ignited, leaving birds to fall from the sky as charred husks. What made this punishment so terrifying wasn't just its scale, it was its precision. The surrounding barley fields remained untouched, a cruel reminder that Gibil could destroy without collateral damage when he chose to. Even the gods weren't immune to his fury. In the obscure revolt of the Igigi, lesser deities attempted to overthrow the pantheon, forging weapons in secret. Gibil, learning of their treachery, didn't confront them directly. Instead, he turned their own forges against them. Tablets from Sippar describe how he made their hammers glow like the sun, the metal growing white-hot until it seared the rebels' hands. The molten tools then twisted into serpents, a signature touch coiling around the conspirators' limbs as they screamed. This wasn't just punishment, it was poetic justice, a demonstration that the god of metallurgy could weaponize craftsmanship itself. Perhaps the most haunting story is the burning of the silent children, a lesser-known myth from Mari. When a cult began sacrificing mute infants, believing their silence made them perfect vessels for dark magic, Gibil intervened with grotesque irony. He filled the children's mouths with living fire, allowing them to scream just once, a deafening chorus of crackling flames that reduced the cult's temple to ash. Archaeologists have found evidence supporting this tale's cultural impact. Terracotta votives showing infants with open mouths, their tongues replaced with tiny bronze flames. What unites these stories isn't just violence, it's Gibil's unsettling selectivity. Unlike storm gods who flattened entire regions or plagued deities who struck blindly, his devastation was surgical. A single rebel's forge might explode while his neighbors remained untouched. A king's arrogance could doom his city while sparing a single beggar who'd once offered cedar to a temple brazier. This capriciousness made him uniquely feared. Prayers to Gibil often included phrases like "turn your face away" rather than begging for blessing, a recognition that his attention, even for a moment, could be catastrophic. Yet there's a paradox in these myths. The same tablets that recount his wrath also describe survivors salvaging strange gifts from the ruins: glass beads formed from melted sand, bronze ingots purified by extreme heat, even new alloys never before seen. Gibil's destruction always left behind something transformed. A scribe in captured this duality perfectly, writing, "The god who burns the wheat also bakes the bread." In the end, even his rage served creation, just not always in ways mortals could predict. The Sumerians didn't just pray to Gibil, they credited him as the unseen architect behind their civilization's greatest leaps. When archaeologists uncovered the world's oldest bronze artifacts in the ruins of they weren't merely looking at ancient tools, they were holding proof of a divine partnership. Metallurgy wasn't just science to the Sumerians, it was sacred alchemy, and Gibil was the original master smith. Every bronze blade that tamed wilderness, every plow that unlocked fertile fields, carried his fingerprint in the alloy's molecular structure. But his influence went beyond metal. The same kilns that fired pottery thousands of years ago revealed traces of ritual tiny clay tablets buried in the ash, inscribed with pleas for Gibil to steady the flames. These weren't superstitions, they were acknowledgments that every technological breakthrough began at the altar. Consider the birth of bronze itself, a revolution disguised as chemistry. Sumerian smiths didn't stumble onto mixing copper and tin by accident. Temple records from Lagash describe metallurgists dreaming of Gibil revealing recipes in visions, his voice hissing like molten metal. The resulting alloy transformed warfare, agriculture, even art. A bronze spearhead could pierce leather armor that turned aside stone weapons, while bronze sickles harvested grain 3 times faster than flint. But here's what's fascinating: the highest grade bronze always came from temple workshops. These weren't just factories, they were extensions of Gibil's forge, where technical skill and devotion fused. When a royal inscription brags of weapons hardened by the god's breath, it wasn't metaphor. Smiths believed genuinely that prayers affected molecular structure, that piety could literally temper metal. Modern tests show they weren't entirely wrong. Ritualistically purified tin produced fewer impurities, creating stronger alloys. Gibil's mark wasn't limited to metal. The first true pottery wheels emerged from cities where his worship ran deepest. Why? Because shaping clay required precise, consistent heat, exactly the control his priests claimed to channel. At Nippur, excavators found a potter's workshop attached to a shrine, its kilns arranged in a spiral mimicking Gibil's sacred flame symbol. The ceramic vessels produced there weren't just functional, they were theological statements, their glossy surfaces proof of divine collaboration. Even urban planning reflected his influence. The ziggurat at Eridu aligns its bricks with the summer solstice sunset, but only after priests tested the orientation by watching how dawn flames reflected off bronze mirrors. Architecture, astronomy, and fire worship intertwined seamlessly. The god's greatest gift might have been intangible, a cultural mindset that linked innovation to devotion. When scribes developed cuneiform, they pressed styluses into clay tablets hardened in Gibil's kilns, ensuring words outlasted stone. Early mathematicians calculated furnace temperatures using base 60 numerals, the same system behind our modern clocks, because tracking sacred fires demanded precision. Even medicine advanced under his gaze. Surgeons sterilized bronze scalpels in flame, chanting hymns to the purifying god. This wasn't religion impeding progress, it was faith fueling experimentation. Perhaps the clearest evidence lies in what archaeologists don't find. In regions where Gibil's worship faded, technology often stagnated. Neighboring Elam used similar ores but lagged centuries behind in metallurgy until adopting Sumerian rituals. The pattern repeats elsewhere. Wherever Gibil's temples rose, bronze quality improved, kilns grew more efficient, and inventions flourished. Coincidence? The Sumerians would have scoffed. To them, progress wasn't just human ingenuity, it was the divine spark meeting mortal perseverance. The moment a prayer heated the furnace just enough to transform raw earth into civilization's building blocks. Today, we'd call this the placebo effect of innovation belief enabling achievement. But walk through the ruins of Ur's smithing quarters, where the walls still bear soot from 4,000-year-old forges, and you'll understand why the Sumerians saw it differently. Every scorch mark, every vitrified brick whispers the same truth. Some flames burn so bright they light the way for centuries. The ruins of ancient Sumer still smolder with traces of Gibil's presence, not in mythical tales, but in tangible artifacts that have survived millennia. Among the most striking are the weapons. In the royal tombs of Ur, archaeologists uncovered bronze daggers with blades etched with cuneiform invoking Gibil's name. One particularly well-preserved example bears the inscription, "By Gibil's hand, this edge shall never dull." These weren't mere boasts. Metallurgic analysis reveals these blades were alloyed with unusual precision, their tin content consistently around 12%, a ratio modern studies confirm maximizes hardness. The hilt of one such dagger, now in the British Museum, shows microscopic traces of cedar resin, suggesting it was anointed with sacred oil before burial, a final plea for the gods' blessing in the afterlife. Temples dedicated to Gibil stand out even in the crumbling landscapes of Mesopotamia. At Cuthah, the bricks of his sanctuary bear faint, intentional scorch marks, not from accidental fires but from ritual burning. Excavators found layers of ash alternating with clean strata, evidence of repeated ceremonial blazes. The altar itself was no simple stone slab. It was a massive copper basin set into the floor, its interior pitted from extreme heat. Nearby, clay tablets list offerings of tamarisk and juniper, woods chosen because they burn at precise temperatures. This wasn't random devotion, it was a science of sacred combustion, where every flame was calibrated to honor the god's preferences. Cylinder seals offer some of the most vivid glimpses into Gibil's worship. One lapis lazuli seal from Lagash depicts a priest in a horned headdress standing before a towering brazier, his hands raised as flames twist into the shape of a serpent. Another, carved from hematite, shows a smith presenting a miniature anvil to an enthroned figure surrounded by undulating fire, likely Gibil receiving tribute. These seals weren't just art, they were functional tools pressed into clay to authenticate documents, literally stamping the god's authority onto legal and economic transactions. The consistency of these images across centuries suggests something remarkable. Gibil's rituals weren't fluid traditions but tightly preserved ceremonies, passed down with near-industrial precision. Perhaps the most haunting evidence comes from the smiths' graves uncovered near Nippur. Here, artisans were buried with their tools, hammers resting on their chests, bellows placed at their feet, but also with curious clay figurines. These statuettes, no taller than a thumb, depict a bearded god holding flames in each palm. Radiocarbon dating of the surrounding charcoal pits reveals these burials cluster around 2500 BC, coinciding with Sumer's bronze-making peak. The message is clear. These craftsmen didn't just serve Gibil in life, they sought his patronage beyond death, carrying tokens of his power into the underworld. Even mundane objects whisper of his influence. At a dig in Umma, researchers found a child's pottery wheel fused to a small bronze stand. At first glance, it seems ordinary, until you notice the cuneiform scratched into its base. Gibil, steady my hands. This wasn't a temple relic but an apprentice's tool, proof that reverence for the fire god permeated daily life. Nearby, a kitchen yielded charred cooking pots deliberately cracked after use. A practice tablets describe as releasing Gibil's essence back to the heavens. From royal armories to peasant hearths, the god's fingerprints are everywhere, not as distant myth, but as a living force etched into the clay and metal of an entire civilization. What makes these artifacts so compelling is their duality. The same bronze that forged swords could shape plows, the fire that hardened bricks also baked bread. Gibil's worship wasn't confined to grand temples, it flared in the hands of potters, smiths, even children learning their craft. Every scorch mark, every inscribed blade tells the same story. To the Sumerians, fire was never just a tool. It was the breath of a god who straddled the line between destruction and creation, his presence as tangible as the warmth of a freshly struck spark. Kings of Sumer didn't just rule, they wielded fire as proof of their divine right, and no god lent himself to royal propaganda more powerfully than Gibil. Take Sargon of Akkad, history's first empire builder. His victory steels didn't depict him merely leading armies, they showed him standing before a towering brazier, hands raised as if conducting the flames themselves. Inscriptions boasted how Gibil had forged his kingship in celestial furnaces, a metaphor with teeth. Bronze was the backbone of Sargon's conquests, and by claiming the fire god's personal endorsement, he framed military dominance as divine craftsmanship. Every conquered city, just another lump of ore hammered into his growing empire. This wasn't empty symbolism. Sargon's artisans perfected a technique called fire gilding, where mercury-bonded gold was heated until it fused to bronze weapons, making them gleam like sunlight. Survivors of his campaigns described these blades as Gibil's fingernails, their terrifying brilliance sold as literal divine intervention, but the propaganda ran deeper than shiny swords. Court scribes penned hymns describing Sargon's birth amid a sacred forge, his skin touched with eternal embers by the god himself. One tablet from Nippur even claims Gibil's voice roared from the palace hearth to approve each new decree, conveniently audible only to royal priests. Later rulers doubled down on the theme. Sholgi of Ur, desperate to outshine his predecessors, commissioned statues of himself with hollow eyes that held actual flames. At night, these glowing pupils would terrify dissenters, their light fed by oil reservoirs hidden in the statue's base. His legal codes explicitly tied justice to metallurgy. Let the wicked be ore in the king's furnace, one clause reads, purged by the fire that knows no lies. Here, Gibil's fire wasn't just a tool of conquest, but of social control, transforming fear of burning into reverence for authority. Even foreign conquerors adopted the tactic. When the Elamites sacked Ur, their king Kutik-Inshushinak didn't just loot Gibil's temple. He staged a ritual where he reforged the city's sacred artifacts himself, hammering a ceremonial dagger on the steps of the ruined ziggurat. The message was brutal. If Gibil could bless new masters, resistance was blasphemy. But perhaps the most cunning twist came from Hammurabi. His famous law code stele shows him receiving authority not from the typical sun god Shamash, but from a flame-encircled Gibil. Why? Because fire doesn't debate. It consumes or it spares, with no gray area, the perfect metaphor for absolute rule. By grafting Gibil's unforgiving nature onto his legal system, Hammurabi framed every judgment as divine metallurgy, the guilty reduced to slag, the righteous emerging tempered and strong. These kings understood something primal, that humanity fears fire's wrath but craves its warmth, and whoever channels that duality can shape nations. Their propaganda worked because it wasn't just lies, it mirrored reality. Bronze did build empires, flames could purify or destroy, and in a world where every forge's spark seemed a tiny piece of Gibil's power, claiming his endorsement wasn't just politics, it was alchemy, turning the leaden weight of coercion into the gold of legitimacy. The glow of Gibil's temples began to dim as the political landscape of Mesopotamia shifted under the weight of Babylon's rising dominance. By the time Hammurabi's empire reached its zenith, the once vibrant cult of the fire god faced an existential challenge, not from conquest but from cultural assimilation. Babylon's pantheon, meticulously organized to reflect imperial unity, had little room for regional deities like Gibil unless they could be absorbed or reassigned. His fiery essence didn't vanish. It was distilled into gods who served Babylon's political narrative. Nabu, the scribble god of wisdom, inherited Gibil's association with transformative power, though framed as intellectual rather than metallurgical. Tablets from Sippar describe Nabu's priests adopting the ritual of writing prayers on bronze before melting them down, a clear echo of Gibil's older rites, now repurposed for a god of cuneiform rather than crucibles. Even Nergal, Babylonia's fearsome god of war and the underworld, absorbed fragments of Gibil's identity. Where Gibil's flames had tempered metal, Nergal's now scorched battlefields. A fascinating clay prism from Nineveh lists offerings once reserved for Gibil sulfur, cedar, and meteoric iron, now presented to Nergal statues with revised incantations. Burn our enemies as you once purified ore. This wasn't mere syncretism, it was theological alchemy, transmuting a god of creative fire into one of destructive fury to suit an empire bent on expansion. Yet traces of Gibil's worship stubbornly persisted in the margins. Rural smiths, far from Babylon's ideological machinery, continued to bury tiny anvil amulets beneath their forges well into the Kassite period. A kiln at Dilbat, carbon dated to 600 years after Babylon's rise, yielded a clay tablet addressed to Gibil of the Hearth, proof that domestic reverence outlasted state-sanctioned cults. Even in cities, subtle rebellions flared. A bronze plaque from late-period Ur shows a smith presenting a sword not to Nabu or Nergal, but to a flame-encircled figure labeled discreetly as the unnamed refiner. The most poignant survival lay in language itself. Babylonian metallurgic terms retained Gibil's fingerprints long after his temples fell. The word for forged temper literally meant Gibil's kiss, while a poorly alloyed bronze was dismissed as fire the god refused. These linguistic fossils hint at a deeper truth. While empires could redirect worship, they couldn't erase the primal understanding that fire's magic predated politics. By the time Persian Zoroastrianism swept through Mesopotamia with its sacred fires, Gibil's name had faded from liturgy, but his essence lived on unexpectedly in Ahura Mazda's divine flames, in the forged rituals of migrant Hittite metalsmiths, even in the Jewish menorah's eternal light. The Sumerians had grasped something timeless. Fire worship isn't about deities, but about humanity's covenant with the element that shaped its destiny. Gibil's cult declined, but the embers he tended never truly went out. They just found new vessels to ignite. As Babylonian influence spread across Mesopotamia, Gibil's fiery essence didn't vanish, it transformed, blending into the shifting tapestry of gods and legends. In Akkadian texts, his name often intertwines with Gura, another fire deity, but the fusion wasn't seamless. Gura inherited Gibil's association with purification, yet where Gibil had been the artisan, Gura became the enforcer. A 7th century BC Assyrian ritual tablet describes Gura as the flame that licks the liar's tongue, his fires now weaponized for oath swearing. Witnesses in legal disputes would pass their hands over Gura's torch, the threat of divine combustion replacing Gibil's more nuanced metallurgical metaphors. This shift reflected broader changes fire as a tool of state power rather than creative craft. Yet traces of Gibil's original character stubbornly lingered. A rare Neo-Assyrian hymn, discovered in the ruins of Nineveh's royal archives, addresses Gura as the forger of ziggurats, a clear callback to Gibil's role in hardening the bricks of civilization. Even the famous Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, in his boastful inscriptions, claimed to wield Gibil's own temper when forging treaties, a nod to the older god's association with unbreakable bonds. The contradictions here are telling. Assyria's empire builders needed fire as both destroyer and unifier, so they borrowed freely from Gibil's duality while erasing his name. Babylon's rise brought a more decisive absorption. Marduk, the city's patron god, steadily absorbed rival deities' traits to cement his supremacy. By the time of Hammurabi's law code, Marduk had claimed Gibil's fiery domain under the epithet Decode Gibil, Lord of Fire. But this wasn't a respectful inheritance, it was a theological takeover. Where Gibil's flames had once tempered swords and baked bread, Marduk's fires now symbolized absolute judgment. The Enuma Elish, Babylon's creation epic, rewrites cosmic history. Marduk doesn't just wield fire, he births it from his own essence, erasing Gibil's role in shaping the world. Scholars debate whether this erasure was deliberate. A fragmentary tablet from Sippar hints at resistance, a scribe's marginal note calling Marduk the usurper of the true forge. But Babylon's cultural machinery was relentless. Temples once dedicated to Gibil were rededicated to Marduk's ever-burning light, their rituals stripped of metallurgical references in favor of solar symbolism. Even the tools changed. Where Gibil's priests had used copper anvils, Marduk's favored gold, a metal too soft for practical forging but perfect for projecting opulence. Still, in quiet corners, the old ways clung to life. A curious Kassite-era cylinder seal, crafted 5 centuries after Babylon's ascendancy, shows a smith god with Gibil's traditional serpent and hammer motifs standing defiantly beside a diminutive Marduk. The inscription reads simply, "The fire remembers, so did the people." Domestic incantations from late-period Yurok still invoked the hidden refiner when lighting hearths. WHILE, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, continued baking clay smithing talismans into house walls well into the Persian era. What's most revealing is how Gibil's legacy fractured along class lines. While royal inscriptions erased him, provincial artisans preserved his lore. A tablet from Neo-Babylonian details how bronze workers secretly added Gibil's name to alloy recipes, calling it the forgotten ingredient. Even the Bible's Book of Daniel, written during the Jewish exile in Babylon, contains an eerie echo. The fiery furnace that tests Shadrach and his companions may draw on surviving memories of Gibil's judgment flames repurposed for monotheism. This cultural afterlife proves something vital. Gods don't truly die when empires overwrite them. They retreat into metaphor, into craft traditions, into the stubborn habits of daily labor. The last cuneiform reference to Gibil by name dates to the Seleucid period, over 2 millennia after his worship began, on a merchant's tablet complaining of Gibil's curse on a shipment of warped copper ingots. Fittingly, it wasn't a priest or king who preserved his memory, but a tradesman grumbling about quality control. The fire god endured not in temples, but in the sparks of forges that never stopped burning, in the collective muscle memory of hands that still shaped metal as if divinity lingered in every strike. Flames crackled to life in the oldest hymns ever written, their verses preserved on clay tablets where Gibil's name burns brightest. One liturgy from the Temple of Cutha declares, "Your fire is the needle that stitches earth to sky, your sparks the nails pinning destiny to the god's decree." This isn't just poetry, it's sacred physics, framing Gibil's flames as the cosmic force binding reality together. The metaphor deepens in the Enuma Elish, where his fire isn't merely destructive but surgical, carving order from chaos like a smith chiseling bronze. When Marduk wages war against Tiamat, it's Gibil's white-hot breath that tempers the celestial weapons, hardening them into instruments of divine justice. The text lingers on this detail, the moment molten metal meets purpose, as if creation itself hinges on the god's furnace. Yet other hymns reveal a gentler side. A fragment from Er's hymn to the sacred hearth describes Gibil as the potter who needs light into clay, his flames coaxing radiance from mundane matter. Here, fire isn't a weapon but an artist's brush, painting warmth onto cold walls and life into lifeless ore. The imagery is tactile. Readers can almost feel the heat pooling like honey as the hymn praises his nurturing glow. Contrast this with the ritual of the broken sword, where priests chant, "As the flawed blade cracks under Gibil's hammer, so too shall the liar's tongue split in his presence." The duality is striking. The same force that gently hardens pottery also tests mortal souls with unforgiving heat. Some of the most vivid metaphors emerge in love poetry. A surprisingly tender tablet from Nippur compares a lover's passion to Gibil's forge at midnight, not just for its intensity but for its transformative power. "You have melted my heart like copper in the god's crucible," the verse confesses, "and reshaped it into something stronger." Even romance for the Sumerians was a metallurgical process where emotions were tempered rather than merely felt. The Epic of Gilgamesh offers a subtler nod to Gibil's influence. When Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh doesn't just mourn. He builds a monument of fire-hardened brick, ensuring his friend's legacy endures like well-tempered bronze. The symbolism is deliberate. Grief, like ore, must pass through flames to become enduring memory. Even the famous light of the fire god that guides Gilgamesh through the cedar forest isn't a torch but a metaphor for resilience, inner fire as divine gift. Perhaps the most chilling literary invocation comes from the Curse of Akkad, where a fallen king's doom is sealed as Gibil's flames lick the foundations of his throne. The description doesn't stop at destruction. It details how the fire drinks the marrow of the land, leaving behind not ash but vitrified stone, a geological truth masquerading as divine judgment. Modern archaeologists have actually found vitrified bricks at Akkadian sites, evidence of historically catastrophic fires. The poets weren't just imagining wrath, they were documenting it, framing disaster as the god's handiwork. These texts share a common thread: fire as the great revealer. Whether illuminating truth in oaths, refining raw potential in lovers or heroes, or exposing a kingdom's fragility, Gibil's literary flames always strip away illusion. The Sumerians understood something profound. Fire doesn't just destroy or create, it exposes, reducing everything it touches to its essence. And that's why their hymns still scorch the imagination millennia later. Embers of a world view where every flame was a word and every word a spark awaiting its forge. Fire was never just a tool or a weapon to the Sumerians. It was the clearest mirror they had for understanding life itself. In Gibil's flickering flames, they saw the essence of existence, that everything must be broken down to be remade, that loss and creation are two sides of the same burning coin. This wasn't just observation, it was philosophy forged in the furnace. Take the myth of the phoenix date palm, where Gibil burns a dying tree to cinders, only for its seeds to sprout faster and stronger in the scorched earth. The story wasn't about agriculture, it was a lesson in resilience, teaching that progress often requires surrender to the fire before renewal can begin. Even the language reflected this. The Sumerian word for understanding, igidu, literally means "I fire," as if true wisdom came only when life's heat stripped away illusion. Destruction as a sacred necessity emerges starkly in rituals like the burning of the old fields. Before planting, farmers would torch their barren plots not just to clear weeds, but to ritually invoke Gibil's presence. The ashes weren't swept away, they were mixed into the soil with prayers, turning devastation into fertility. A temple hymn from Lhasa puts it bluntly: what the fire takes, it returns tenfold. What resists the flame was never worth keeping. This mindset permeated every level of society. When scribes copied texts onto fresh clay tablets, they deliberately shattered the originals after baking the duplicates, not from carelessness, but because preservation required annihilation. Gibil's flames didn't just destroy, they edited reality, burning away the obsolete to make room for the new. Yet the most profound metaphor lay in metallurgy itself. To the Sumerians, ore wasn't purified in the furnace, it was liberated. A broken tablet from Mari describes copper veins as the earth's trapped dreams, with Gibil as the divine smith freeing their potential. This idea reshaped their view of suffering. Just as metal had to endure the crucible to become tools, humans had to withstand life's fires to discover their purpose. Medical texts applied this literally. Fever was called Gibil's crucible, an ordeal that either strengthened the spirit or revealed weakness. Even grief followed this logic. Mourners wore amulets of half-melted bronze, symbols that loss could reshape rather than break. Knowledge itself was framed as a fiery alchemy. The famed school tablet of Nippur instructs students, "Let your mind be the ore, the teacher's words the bellows, until wisdom shines like polished bronze." Education wasn't passive absorption but active transformation, with ignorance as the dross burned away. This linked Gibil to scribble gods like Nisaba in unexpected ways. Both were deities of revelation, one through flame, the other through cuneiform. A striking cylinder seal shows them side by side, Gibil's fire illuminating the tablet Nisaba inscribes, as if truth required both heat and hand to manifest. The ultimate expression of this philosophy may be the myth of the broken tablets, where Gibil melts down flawed laws inscribed on copper, recasting them into a sturdier code. The message, justice like metal, must sometimes be reforged to serve changing times. Here, fire becomes societal evolution, a force that dismantles outdated systems to build better ones. It's no accident Hammurabi later placed Gibil's symbol above his laws, framing legal progress as divine metallurgy. What makes these ideas timeless is their raw honesty. The Sumerians didn't romanticize fire's brutality, they respected it. A prayer from Yoruk admits, "Your burns scar, Lord Gibil, but scars remind us what we've survived." In a world where we still struggle with change, their clarity resonates. Every time we speak of baptism by fire or trial by ordeal, we echo their understanding. That transformation isn't gentle, that wisdom often arrives seared at the edges, and that from the ashes of what we were, we forge what we might become. Though the last temple to Gibil crumbled millennia ago, his flame never fully extinguished. Today, modern metalworkers and neo-pagan practitioners are stoking fresh embers of devotion to the ancient fire god. In dimly lit workshops from Portland to Berlin, blacksmiths whisper his name when quenching blades, while reconstructed Sumerian rituals unfold at solstice gatherings. This isn't mere historical cosplay, it's a recognition that the alchemy of transforming raw earth into tools and art still feels miraculous, even in our age of electric forges. The parallels between Gibil and later Smith gods reveal fascinating cultural DNA. Roman Vulcan inherited his metallurgical mastery but lost the Sumerian god's cosmic scope. Where Gibil shaped stars and the underworld, Vulcan became confined to his mythical workshop under Mount Etna. Greek Hephaestus came closer, with his limp echoing Gibil's occasional depictions as scorched or wounded by his own flames. Yet even Hephaestus lacked Gibil's raw duality. His fires crafted beautiful armor but rarely purified or judged. The difference lies in origin stories. Mediterranean smith gods emerged as specialized laborers in divine bureaucracies, while Gibil sprang from a civilization where fire itself was the thin barrier between survival and oblivion. Contemporary artisans are reclaiming that primal connection. The sacred smithing movement, gaining traction on platforms like Instagram and TikTok, blends traditional techniques with ritual, chanting reconstructed hymns while hammering or etching Gibil's cuneiform symbol into anvils. At the Crucible Art Center in Oakland, students learn bronze casting alongside lectures on Mesopotamian metallurgical prayers, connecting handwork to history. This revival isn't about rejecting modernity. Industrial blacksmith Jocelyn Beardsley, whose Damascus steel knives sell for thousands, describes Gibil as the patron saint of creative destruction, a reminder that laser cutters and plasma torches are just new kinds of sacred fire. Archaeometallurgists have inadvertently fueled this revival. When researchers recreated Bronze Age techniques using Sumerian texts, they discovered practical wisdom in the rituals. The exact juniper wood specified in hymns burned at the ideal temperature for smelting copper, while prayers timed to planetary movements aligned with optimal atmospheric conditions for forging. Science confirmed what the ancients knew intuitively: spirituality and metallurgy were never truly separate. Universities now host myth and metal symposiums where chemists analyze temple artifacts alongside historians translating incantations, revealing how divine sparks described in tablets often correlate with trace nickel content, creating unexpected blue flames. Even pop culture whispers of Gibil's return. The fantasy RPG Sumerian 6 features him as a playable character whose fire spells don't just damage enemies but temporarily strengthen allies' gear, a clever nod to his transformative nature. Heavy metal bands like Fire Temple weave reconstructed Sumerian melodies into lyrics about forging destiny. These aren't shallow references, they're proof that our collective imagination still thrills to the idea of fire as a living force with personality and purpose. Perhaps the most poignant modern parallel lies in climate change activism. When environmental protesters declare the world is burning, they echo Sumerian flood myths where Gibil both ignites and purifies. The god who embodied fire's creative and destructive sides now serves as an unintended metaphor for our planetary crisis, reminding us that the same element that birthed civilization could reduce it to ashes unless respected. Contemporary artists like Layla Shawa install flaming sculptures titled Gibil's Choice, challenging viewers to consider whether humanity will temper its excesses or be consumed by them. The ultimate testament to Gibil's endurance, metallurgy itself. Every skyscraper's steel skeleton, every smartphone circuit board carries the echo of that first divine spark struck in Sumer's workshops. We may no longer attribute volcanic eruptions to his anger or bronze sheen to his breath, but when we speak of trial by fire or describe a genius as incandescent, we're speaking Gibil's language. The fire god lives on wherever heat transforms matter and wherever humans pause to marvel at the magic in that alchemy. The origins of Gibil's spark fiery debates among scholars. Was he always a major deity, or did he rise from humble beginnings? Some tablets depict him as a minor forge spirit, a mere assistant to Enki in early creation myths, only to emerge centuries later as a cosmic force shaping stars and souls. This shift raises tantalizing questions. Did Gibil's ascent mirror humanity's own technological revolution, as metallurgy transformed from practical craft to civilization's backbone? A broken hymn from Eridu calls him the little flame that grew tall enough to lick the sky, suggesting his status evolved alongside Sumerian society's dependence on fire. Yet other experts argue this interpretation misreads the evidence that Gibil was always significant, but earlier records focused on his practical roles before later poets expanded his theology. The truth may lie in the ruins of Kutha, where archaeologists found a 4,000-year-old smithy buried beneath his temple, its walls scorched with layers of ritual fires. The oldest strata contain tiny votive figurines of a generic fire spirit, while upper layers reveal intricate statues of the full-fledged god. Like metal refined in a crucible, Gibil's divinity seems to have been purified and strengthened over time. The fragmentary nature of his myths only deepens the mystery. Why do some tablets describe Gibil forging the first constellations, while others omit his celestial role entirely? A controversial theory points to political erasure, that rival city-states downplayed his cosmic functions to elevate their own patron gods. The most glaring gap appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where fire plays pivotal roles yet Gibil goes conspicuously unnamed. Some scholars believe this wasn't oversight but censorship, a deliberate omission by Babylonian scribes reshaping the narrative to glorify Marduk. Supporting this, a recently deciphered fragment from Yorok contains a damaged passage where Gilgamesh invokes the forger of heavenly roads, a known epithet for Gibil, suggesting his presence was scrubbed from later versions. Then there's the enigma of his missing consort. Nearly every major Sumerian deity had a divine partner, yet Gibil appears solitary in most records except for one baffling tablet from Lhasa. This cracked clay slab mentions Belet Ili of the sacred kiln, a goddess otherwise unknown who shared Gibil's bed and anvil. Was she a forgotten wife, a regional variation, or perhaps a later scribe's invention? The mystery intensifies when chemical analysis revealed the tablet's clay matches kilns in Gersu, a city hostile to Lhasa's priesthood. Was this a theological bombshell or political propaganda disguised as myth? Perhaps the most haunting unsolved question involves the fire test rituals. Multiple texts reference trials where supplicants handled white-hot metal to prove Gibil's favor, yet none describe the mechanics. How did priests prevent horrific burns? Cuneiform medical tablets from Nippur mention a salve of cooled copper and crushed moonstone, while archaeobotanists found traces of licorice root and numbing poppy in temple braziers. Some modern metallurgists suggest the miraculous survival could involve primitive thermite reactions or layered metals conducting heat away from skin. But without a complete ritual text, we're left guessing, like reconstructing a symphony from scattered notes. Even Gibil's ultimate fate divides experts. Traditional views held that he faded into obscurity under Babylon, yet a provocative study of Persian-era incantation bowls reveals craftsmen still invoking Gibil the Hidden well into the first millennium BC. His symbols reappear in unexpected places. A Parthian sword guard engraved with his serpent and anvil motif, a Roman-era amulet from Dura Europos depicting a flame god with distinct Sumerian features. These scattered embers suggest his worship didn't vanish so much as retreat into workshop shadows and oral traditions, flaring up wherever metal met mystery. The greatest enigma lingers in modern Iraq's desert winds, where Bedouin tribes still whisper of Gibli, a spirit who hardens both steel and hearts. Folklorists recorded smiths in Nasiriyah leaving bits of iron in furnaces as offerings, a practice echoing Sumerian rites. Whether this represents unbroken tradition or cultural memory reshaped by time, it proves some flames never truly die. They just await the right hand to stoke them anew. While Gibil never achieved the pop culture fame of Zeus or Anubis, his fiery essence flickers in unexpected corners of modern media, often disguised under different names but bearing his unmistakable imprint. The strategy game Age of Mythology features a Sumerian civilization expansion where players summon a fire god called Nergal to rain destruction on enemies. But look closer, the deity's abilities molten bronze to strengthen weapons and cleansing flame to heal units are pure Gibil, borrowed from his original metallurgical and purifying roles. This sly repackaging reflects a broader trend. Creators hesitant to use obscure Sumerian names but hungry for their rich symbolism, literature takes bolder risks. In The Golem and the Jinni, Helene Wecker's acclaimed novel, the Jinni's backstory as a craftsman enslaved by a desert wizard echoes Gibil's mythic tension between creator and destroyer. When the Jinni forges a delicate necklace while recalling his masters who shaped fire like clay, it's a direct nod to Sumerian smithing hymns. Even the Jinni's erratic temper mirrors Gibil's duality. His flames heal the protagonist's frostbite but also accidentally burn her workshop. These nuances suggest careful research, though the novel omits Gibil's cosmic roles in favor of personal drama. Then there's the cult classic Princess Mononoke, where the boar god Okoto's corruption and fiery demise parallel Gibil's darker myths. Studio Ghibli's animators studied Mesopotamian art, and Okoto's molten veins resemble descriptions of Gibil's burning arteries in the destruction of Arata. Yet Miyazaki transplants the themes into Shinto cosmology, proof that some archetypes transcend their origins. Video games occasionally resurrect Gibil outright. Smite's 2022 Myths of Mesopotamia event introduced him as a playable mage, his attacks featuring serpentine flames and molten metal. While flashy, the design captures key details. His hammer drips liquid bronze, referencing metallurgy, and his ultimate ability temporarily transforms enemies into scorched statues, a clever riff on Gibil's role in turning arrogant kings to glass. Even his voice lines, growling, "I do not burn cities, I refine them," channel the god's ominous duality. But pop culture's most telling Gibil homage might be God of War, Ragnarok's Lady Sif. Though Norse, her golden arm forged in dwarven fires, yet capable of both nurturing crops and crushing skulls, behaves exactly like Gibil's sacred bronze. The parallel isn't accidental. Game director Eric Williams admitted studying Sumerian metallurgy myths for their unique take on weaponized craftsmanship. These appearances, though scattered, prove Gibil's lasting appeal. Whether disguised as a genie's trauma or a pixelated spell effect, his core idea endures. Fire isn't just a tool or weapon, it's the alchemy that separates chaos from civilization, destruction from rebirth. Every time a fictional smith prays over an anvil or a cursed blade glows unnaturally, the god of Sumer's forges whispers through the flames. Few realize Gibil's fiery dominion stretched beyond metal, into the glittering depths of lapis lazuli, the azure gemstone prized more than gold in ancient Sumer. While today we associate lapis with cool blues, the Sumerians saw it as frozen fire, its gold-flecked veins echoing the sparks of Gibil's forge. Tablets from Mari detail how merchants transported raw lapis from distant Afghanistan to temple workshops, where priests heated the stone over sacred flames before carving amulets. Why? Because the heat revealed hidden fractures a practiced metallurgists confirm actually works, but also because Gibil was believed to awaken the stone's celestial power. A hymn from describes lapis as the night sky tempered in Gibil's furnace, its flecks of pyrite transformed into divine constellations by his touch. Even more intriguing is the lost fire oracle of Gersu, where Gibil's priests interpreted fate in the dance of flames. Unlike Delphi's smoke-filled chamber, this ritual relied on molten metal. A recently deciphered tablet describes how priests poured bronze into water-filled pits, then read the jagged shapes formed by rapid cooling. A branching pattern might signal impending war, while spiral forms promised abundant harvests. Archaeologists found one such pit in 2019, its walls still stained with copper residue and etched with cryptic symbols, proof that divination wasn't just metaphor but metallurgical science. The oracle's accuracy likely stemmed from keen observation. Jagged fractures in bronze do correlate with higher tin content, which ancient smiths knew made weapons brittle. Gibil's prophecies, it seems, were equal parts mysticism and material wisdom. The god's name took fascinating detours as neighboring cultures adopted his cult. In Elam, he became Kiba, a minor smith god whose symbol was a flaming mountain rather than an anvil. Hittite texts refer to Zipawa, a fire deity who lost Gibil's metallurgical role but gained control over volcanic eruptions. Most surprising is his echo in early Hebrew traditions. Some scholars argue the angel of the furnace, who protected Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the Book of Daniel, carries traces of Gibil's mercy toward devout craftsmen. Even the Babylonian god Giru, often considered a mere copy of Gibil, developed unique traits. His fires purified legal oaths but couldn't forge weapons, reflecting Babylon's bureaucratic priorities over Sumer's artisan ethos. A little-known hymn from Sippar offers the most startling twist, Gibil's fleeting connection to beer. While Ninkasi was Sumer's official brew deity, one text describes malt being dried over the low fires of the refiner, referring to Gibil. The resulting brew, called black beer, was reserved for temple elites and symbolized the alchemy of turning grain into something transcendent, much like metal's transformation. Modern brewers experimenting with the recipe discovered these fires imparted a smoky depth, proving ancient descriptions of the drink's flames on the tongue weren't just poetic license. Perhaps the most poignant survival of Gibil's legacy is found not in texts but in linguistics. The Akkadian word for inspiration, hamtu, literally means to breathe furnace air, a direct link to the belief that Gibil's forge exhaled creativity into mortal minds. Even today, when we speak of ideas sparking or igniting, we're unknowingly speaking the language of a civilization that saw fire not just as a tool, but as the breath of divine ingenuity. Gibil's legacy is a tapestry woven from equal parts destruction and creation, a god who could reduce cities to glass, yet also taught humanity to turn raw earth into civilization's tools. His flames were never just one thing. They forged the first plowshares that fed empires and the swords that toppled them. They purified temple offerings while incinerating blasphemers with the same indifferent heat. This duality wasn't a contradiction to the Sumerians, it was the heartbeat of existence. To stand before a forge was to witness the divine paradox that every act of making requires breaking first, that progress and loss burn in the same fire. What makes Gibil's myths resonate isn't just their antiquity, it's their startling humanity. When a smith prayed over molten bronze, they weren't just invoking a distant deity. They were acknowledging the fragile line between control and chaos, between the warmth of a hearth and the wildfire that could consume it. The Sumerians didn't worship Gibil out of simple fear or gratitude. They recognized in him a mirror for their own struggles, the farmer burning last year's stubble to nourish new growth, the potter cracking flawed vessels to remake them stronger. His stories taught them that fire, like humanity, is never purely benevolent or cruel. It simply is, and our survival depends on learning its language. That's why these myths endure. They're not archaic curiosities, but blueprints for understanding our own relationship with power. In an age of climate crises and nuclear energy, Gibil's lessons feel eerily prescient. Do we wield our modern flames, technology, industry, innovation with the reverence of a temple smith, or the recklessness of a king who thinks himself fireproof? The answer might lie in those clay tablets where artisans etched the same plea for millennia. Grant me heat enough to shape, but not so much that I am shaped. So the next time you strike a match, fire up a stove, or even watch a welder's arc cut through steel, remember, you're participating in a ritual as old as civilization itself. The sparks that leapt from Gibil's anvil still fly around us in the glow of streetlights, the hum of factories, the silicon pulses of smartphones. And if you listen closely, you might hear the echoes of Sumerian hymns in their crackle, whispering that creation and destruction have always danced in the same flame. This is just one thread in Mesopotamia's vast mythological tapestry. From the cunning of Enki to the thunderous might of Enlil, each deity holds up a mirror to the triumphs and terrors of being human. So don't let the journey end here. Dive deeper, and you'll find that ancient myths aren't just stories, they're the embers of our shared humanity, waiting to be stoked anew.